Want to welcome you back to our afternoon programming. And we're going to start off with having a perspective of what's happening across the states. So we have three national organizations that are joining us today. I am pleased to welcome Jisoo Song, who is the Director of Programs and Initiatives from CETA. It is a national organization for state education technology directors. And so some of you who are at DPI or have been there know this organization well, as they support folks across the country. Previously, he was with the U.S. Department of Ed, where he worked with publishing federal policy guidance on broadband adoption, organizing national campaigns and convenings, and then supporting the development of a national ed tech plan, which we'll hear a little bit about from him today. Then we'll hear from Lauren Gendel, who is who's with the National Conference of State Legislators. She's a policy analyst where she researches K-12 education policy topics such as school meals, special education, technology, and digital learning. And then finally, we'll have Tom Green, who is the Vice President of Advocacy for Excel in Ed. His colleague here, Laura, is here as well today, who may be able to help answer some questions as we navigate the rest of our afternoon. But Tom manages their advocacy and government affairs team and works with leaders and policymakers from across the state to promote student-centered solutions focused on educational quality, innovation, and opportunity. I'll finally mention that our Director of Strategic Initiatives, Callie Edwards, is here with us as well. She'll be helping to navigate the virtual Zoom room and may be able to navigate some of the questions for our panelists too. So please give them a warm welcome to the Friday Institute. Excellent, thank you so much. So we'd like to hear a little bit about the work that you're doing at CETA, Jisoo. We'll go ahead and get started with some of the things that you are currently seeing, and we'll navigate the slides here for the audience in the room.
Awesome, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you to the Friday Institute for convening us on a discussion about certainly an important topic. As Emma already introduced, my name is Jisoo Song, Director of Projects and Initiatives at CETA, the State EdTech Directors Association. I was most recently with the Office of EdTech at the Department of Ed, where I led digital equity initiatives and supported the development of the 2024 National EdTech Plan. Some of you may already know CETA is the principal membership organization for state EdTech and digital learning leaders around the country. And the Friday Institute asked CETA to share what we've been seeing around the country. So I'll go over how the 2024 National EdTech Plan and data from our latest EdTech Trend Survey might be relevant and helpful in informing local policy. So just an overview of what we're seeing. So states are taking different approaches to cell phone and social media access in schools. Obviously, I think my other colleagues on this panel might expand on this a little bit, but I'll let you know what we're tracking here at CETA. There are statewide bans, of course, from Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, state level restrictions on device use in schools. These states do offer some exceptions for educational uses. Incentivization in other cases in states like Arkansas, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, offering maybe some pilot grants or flexibilities in existing funding structures to allow districts to purchase equipment that would restrict use. And then others more relying on local restrictions like Indiana, Minnesota, Ohio, Virginia, Alabama, Connecticut, Washington, that encourages or requires districts to develop policies that would restrict device use during the school day with some educational exceptions. I think it's still a little bit early to definitively say which of these models might be the most effective in ensuring that devices are used in appropriate and responsible ways when students are in school. But here at CETA, we do believe that any policy that aims to steer when and how technology is used in educational settings needs to be paired with intentional efforts to build students' digital health, safety, and citizenship skills, as well as efforts to build educator capacities towards this end. And I'm going to lean on the National EdTech Plan a little bit for a little bit of rationale behind why we're saying this. So CETA served as the lead contractor for the U.S. Department of Education's OET in developing the 2024 National EdTech Plan. The NETP is updated usually every 4 to 6 years, and it serves to set a national vision for how technology can be best used to transform teaching and learning. And the 2024 NETP launched this January at the White House was informed through inputs from over 1,000 educators and education leaders around the country and recommends a series of system-level solutions to bridge the digital access, design, and use divides. And then I'll dive a little deeper into that digital access divide piece. The digital access divide encompasses the discussion around how to ensure students are connected to internet and devices, of course, so that they can engage in technology-empowered learning experiences even outside the four walls of the classroom. But the digital access divide also encompasses a discussion around ensuring our students are provided with opportunities to build their digital health, safety, and citizenship skills. We believe that technology can serve as a vehicle that grants access to a vast network of knowledge and opportunities, but this needs to be paired with deliberate efforts to ensure that students can use these tools in a safe and responsible manner. My colleague, Zach Chase from the Office of EdTech, who you all might know, sort of makes an analogy to like driver's ed, right? You know, cars and automobiles can be a really cool tool to take, you know, people to areas that they've never seen before, right? But just as we do in driver's ed to teach students how to be safe and responsible drivers on the road, we pair, you know, that sort of empowering technology with a deliberate instruction on, you know, safe and responsible use, right? So that's the analogy that I've heard and used that I really like when it comes to this topic. So a couple of examples from the National EdTech Plan that I want to point out. A number of system level leaders are already moving in this direction. At the state level, we know states like Delaware require digital citizenship and media literacy skills to be incorporated into state academic standards, right? At the intermediate ESA level, in Allegheny County IU3, they partner with organizations like Common Sense, who often do a lot of work on the digital citizenship piece, and the Grateful Foundation to provide resources to students, as well as families and educators to make sure that they're building their capacity on this topic as well. And then, of course, at the district level, Wichita Public Schools leverages their ed tech coaches to build educator capacity to build students' knowledge of digital safety, health, and citizenship. The State EdTech Trends Report, you all might be one of the first ones that I'm talking to about this because it released yesterday. But the need to support our educators as part of this effort is supported by some of the data from our 2024 State EdTech Trends Survey. Annually, we partner with an organization called Whiteboard Advisors just to get a sense of what states are prioritizing when it comes to various technology issues. From state EdTech leader perspectives, professional development and instructional support was cited as one of the top unmet needs of 2024 after home access and funding issues. And this topic actually observed the greatest growth in terms of percentage points since the 2023 survey out of any single topic. So when it comes to digital health, safety, and citizenship, of course, there's the content piece of it, but we need to be providing our educators with the supports that they need to be able to incorporate these topics in learning settings. I'll just close out with a couple of other considerations on this topic from the National EdTech Plan as states and districts create policies on this topic, right? You know, what is the school community's vision around what the role of technology should be in educational settings? Are you considering topics like online safety, privacy protections, digital health and wellness, responsible use, balancing screen time with other, off-screen, healthy activities? How are different members of the school community being engaged to inform these discussions, informing the continuous improvement and the development and implementation of policies, right? How are families provided with some guidance around how they can support these discussions around digital citizenship from home? How are students provide opportunities to build healthy relationships with technology, even outside of school grounds? And then what measurable goals would help indicate success on these topics? And how would data be collected, right? This can help with regular updates to policies to keep pace with the rapidly evolving digital landscape, right? We know AI is such an emerging, often changing topic. So how can we make sure that we're setting some measurable goals so that we can be adaptable and flexible as these new technologies enter our classrooms? And then finally, how might efforts to build digital health, safety, and citizenship be embedded into other core curricula so that educators don't feel like they're inundated with one other thing that need to do on their plates on top of everything else that they're already having to do? So I know this is a parallel topic to the topic of self-billing restrictions and device use, but we felt like we want to emphasize this topic as a grounding point as, people are thinking about policies around what the healthy relationship with technology should be within the school grounds. So I appreciate, again, the Friday Institute folks are inviting me. I'll pass it to my other colleagues to continue the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jisoo. I think you touched on some things in detail in an application that have come up in our conversation this morning. So appreciate you elaborating on what that looks like and some other questions for us to consider. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren then to share a little bit about her work and the perspective there from the organization.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Lauren Gendil and I'm a policy analyst with the National Conference of State Legislatures. I primarily cover K-12 topics, including but not limited to educational technology, digital learning, and artificial intelligence. And to provide a little bit of context on NCSL as an organization, we exist to serve the 50 states, Commonwealths, territories, and the District of Columbia. We provide bipartisan policy research, technical assistance, training resources, as well as organize events to convene our members. So now that we've become acquainted, we can jump into the presentation. Next slide, sorry. So this slide here serves to provide an overview of recent research surrounding device use in schools, which has focused on academic uses, non-academic uses, and their associated implications for academic performance and learning, mental health, and cyberbullying. Not going to go into too much detail here, but I have included links for further review if you're interested. Next slide. The main focus of my presentation today is on state activities surrounding cell phone use in schools, and we will start with recently introduced legislation. So at least 22 states have proposed legislation related to cell phone use in schools since 2023, and 8 of these states have enacted legislation. Next slide. While much of our focus at NCSL is on legislatures, other state actors have also been involved on this topic. In addition to the 8 states enacting legislation, 2 states have observed executive action or governor-issued initiatives, and at least 6 states have observed state board or Department of Education action, primarily in the form of adopted regulations and guidance. Next slide. Beyond recent actions, we're going to shift back to look at the current policy landscape, which refers to those newly established measures along with some previously existing ones. As highlighted in the previous slide, this landscape is characterized by the involvement of multiple state actors in addition to local school governing bodies. The key takeaway on this slide is that legislation commonly involves policies adopted on the local level. And when I say local level, I'm referring to school districts and boards of education. There are 3 ways in which legislation may affect the establishment of policies on the local level. So that's by authorizing policies to be adopted, requiring policies to be adopted, including by specifying components, and providing for funding and resources that guide local policy practices. Next slide. So starting with policy authorizations, some states have authorized local policies, commonly by specifying permitted approaches. So the bolded letters here serve to indicate differences in approaches permitted under legislation. You'll see Michigan generally refers to a policy on whether a student may carry a personal device. California refers to a policy with language limiting or prohibiting device use. And with California, I'll note that there is a pending bill that has been enrolled and pending the governor's signature that would change this from an authorization to a requirement. And then lastly here, Tennessee includes language on withholding phones. Next slide. Other states have established requirements surrounding local policy adoption by outlining specific components that may be present within a local policy. So similar to the policies authorizing local policies, language specifying required components can vary by state, which ultimately informs the degree of discretion provided in setting said policy. So here you have Kentucky and Minnesota, which require policies generally on personal devices, and specific to their possession and use. Next slide. Oregon and Ohio have both required policies with specified components. You'll see Oregon's requirements focus on academic activities and curriculum alongside appeals processes, and Ohio's requirements center on limiting use, reducing distractions, and providing exemptions. Next slide. These 3 states have required local policy adoption with prohibitory language. So both Florida and Indiana require policies to prohibit device use and provide for certain exemptions. And then South Carolina has required local policies to prohibit access to devices as a condition for receiving funding under the state's most recent budget bill. Next slide. And then lastly here, Louisiana enacted a bill this year that created a statewide prohibition on device possession throughout the instructional day with specified exceptions. Next slide. So the state legislation that I've covered up to this point has centered primarily on local policy adoption and related requirements on the local level. So now we're going to shift to some ways in which states are informing local policies through incentives and guidance beyond simply specifying policy components. Next slide. Next slide. Is this the one with Delaware and Pennsylvania? I apologize, I can't see the...
Yeah, this is Delaware.
Thank you so much. So Delaware and Pennsylvania have established incentives or grant programs through legislation this year, and Arkansas did so as well through executive action. These programs relate to cell phone pouches and lockable bags, which store devices throughout the instructional day. And school entities applying for funding may be required to adopt policies related to prohibiting cell phone use during the school day. So there's that connection before that I was mentioning with the local policies. And this is a specific example of what is happening in Pennsylvania. Next slide. So now digging into guidance, states have been active through both legislation and state board or department action here. So here, if you'll remember previously, I mentioned that Minnesota and Ohio recently established local policy requirements. Those same bills also required the establishment of guidance. Minnesota's guidance adopted pursuant to legislation involves model guidelines on 2 policy options, which are organized by grade band. And Ohio's includes a model policy limiting phone use and also includes supports for stakeholders and considerations surrounding school safety and emergency management. Next slide. Here, boards and departments in Connecticut and Virginia have also issued guidance surrounding personal device use in schools. Connecticut's includes a statement in addition to policy guidance subject to grade band and responsibilities for stakeholders. And Virginia's includes a definition of an exemption surrounding cell phone free education. And that term is tied to the governor's executive order that was issued earlier this year. And their guidance also includes some emergency and local level considerations. Next slide. So this last slide here summarizes some of the specifications surrounding uses and exemptions after observing these guidance documents, as well as considering language present with policy authorizations, requirements, and incentives. So generally speaking, uses and exemptions, or simply whether there is a prohibition, involve more than observed on face. There are specifications with respect to the when, the where, and the who involved. So the first 4 areas here relate to the when involved with cell phone use. Considerations on devices used for educational purposes, such as digital learning and agent development, can inform when devices may be used in the classroom. Special education and health, along with safety and emergencies, relate to specifications surrounding when exemptions are authorized. And then these bottom 2 specifications relate to the where, or the use, or where those uses and exemptions are practiced, being the learning environment or classroom. And lastly here, the stakeholders refer to the who, including those affected by policies, being students, along with teachers and administrators who are charged with overseeing implementation. Next slide. So I could spend all day talking to you guys about this topic, but to conclude, I'm going to provide a link to our searchable bill tracking database, which covers a variety of topics across the pre-K through 12 education spectrum. I regularly am tracking legislation under the technology and education topic, and bills related to cell phone use in schools can be found there as well. And I will also note that there is a forthcoming state legislature's news article on the topic coming soon. Next slide. Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope this was helpful.
That was a super speedy trip around the country for us. Thank you so much. I wanted to flag for you all that we do have a link and a QR code to Lauren's slides and Jisoo's slides as well. So you're able to find all of that information from both of them there. I also posted on the agenda document online. You'd be able to access this dashboard that she speaks about too. So that is something I saw folks scrambling and writing a bunch of notes. And so wanted to let you know that was available. Tom, would love to turn it over to you and hear your perspective and the work that's happening with Excel in Ed on this topic.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me and hosting this critical conversation. I'm especially grateful as a former North Carolina high school teacher because it's important to raise this issue of phones in schools and what we can do about it. You know, I had a phone-free policy in my classroom, but it is helpful to have a uniform rule and uniform expectations across the school building with the support of your principal, local district, and even the state. We've seen the research. 97% of 11 to 17-year-olds have reported using their phones at school. Kids on average get 237 notifications per day, resulting in about 45 minutes to an hour of them just picking up the phone to see the notification. Even more concerning is that on average, kids spend 5 upwards to 10 hours per day in front of their screens, which is leading to declines in mental health, more isolation, poor social skills and interactions, learning loss, and declines in academic achievement. And this is twofold. One, students are distracted by their own phones in school, so they can't focus on learning and what's happening in the classroom. But they're also distracted by their classmates' phones. One study found that kids who were distracted by a classmate's phone performed 15 points lower, which is one grade level, on their comprehensive math assessment compared to students who weren't distracted. Other negative impacts include sleep deprivation, which has a compounding impact on mental health and academic achievement. There's exposure to inappropriate content and an increase in cyberbullying. So it is no wonder teens say in surveys that they feel happier and more peaceful when they don't have access to their phones. Thankfully, leaders have taken action. It's been mentioned previously, but local school districts are taking action to restrict phones, like the Los Angeles Unified School District, New York City schools, Marietta schools in Georgia, Montgomery schools in Alabama, and Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools here in North Carolina. And the list goes on. The Montgomery School District reports that since implementing their no phone policy, they witnessed a drop in discipline rates. The ban is also popular among school staff who report a reduction in distractions towards learning and engagement. State leaders are getting engaged, and it is bipartisan. I think that there's a lot of consensus when it comes to education in the country, and this is one issue that is getting consensus from both sides of the aisle, where you have someone like Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida calling for the state to take action, as well as Governor Gavin Newsom in California. Florida was the first state to take action. They passed a law that restricts phones during instructional time. And then Indiana followed suit with a similar policy. South Carolina and Louisiana passed strong policies to restrict phones in the building at all times. South Carolina, I think it was mentioned by Lauren, they have some language in there to withhold funding if school districts do not restrict phones. So it's also interesting that before South Carolina took action, they surveyed their teachers. The Department of Education there in the state found that 55% of teachers said that phones cause a daily disruption in their classrooms, and they support a ban at all times in the school building. And then an additional 37% of teachers say that phones should be restricted at least during instructional time. In Arkansas, Governor Huckabee Sanders recently announced a pilot program. It's voluntary. It's not a mandate that schools have to establish a no phone policy. But if they do, she was able to provide funding for them to purchase, cell phone lockers or the secure pouches. And so far, 75% of school districts have voluntarily signed up for this grant program because they're going to implement their own local policy. So each state can go about this differently, but this is one approach that Arkansas has taken. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, their budget allows school districts to use an established mental health grant program to purchase those pouches and cell phone lockers. And as mentioned, also Delaware has a similar provision. Ohio and Oklahoma have passed policy encouraging school districts to take action. In fact, just yesterday, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt issued an executive order outlining his priority to limit smartphones during school time. And potentially setting up a conversation during the legislature next session. Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia signed an executive order that charged the Virginia Department of Education to support school districts in going phone free during instructional time and to provide policy guidance from the department. He also wants the department to facilitate a statewide discussion, to talk about this issue, to get buy-in, to hear different perspectives, and then also provide best practices for locals as they implement these policies. This is incredible progress, yet more work remains. We expect many more states to take action. So at Excel in Ed, we encourage states that haven't taken action to consider similar approaches, like passing a statewide policy restricting phones at minimum during instructional time, or to go even a step further and restrict, like Louisiana and South Carolina, to restrict during the school day at all times. Exceptions can be made for teacher supervised instructional practices that require phones and for emergencies. Those exceptions should be defined in the rulemaking process, and we have guidance on that. States can also support local implementation in three ways. One is to provide the model policies and to provide guidance on how to construct those policies. Number two, funding for cell phone lockers and pouches is helpful and supports the school districts as they go down this path, as well as providing mental health services. Policymakers can also get to the root cause of phone addiction by restricting social media for minors and preventing them from being exposed to inappropriate content. Florida passed the age restrictions to access social media, and New York, under Governor Hochul, prevents social media companies from using addictive algorithms for children under the age of 18. Also, departments of education, like state departments of education, can provide resources for parents. One, to encourage parents to delay buying smartphones until 8th or ninth grade. This is a little bit outside the policy discussion. It's more of a societal social issue where if parents decide collectively that we're going to wait until like 8th or ninth grade before we purchase our kid a smartphone, it reduces peer pressure and it reduces the pressure on parents to make sure that their kids aren't left out. The departments of education can also highlight apps that track online activity and give resources on how to encourage independent play. We've lost a lot of independent play for kids in our country because they're stuck on their phones. And when you're not being a kid and playing outside and having phone-free activities, you're not developing your social skills and ability to interact with other people. Policymakers could also consider childhood independence laws to let kids at an appropriate age go outside unsupervised and play. States have passed laws to ensure that parents aren't criminally prosecuted or investigated by social service agencies. And these get bipartisan support from Utah, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Illinois, and Connecticut. And finally, we recommend that states implement digital literacy standards to help teach students how to safely navigate the digital world, but also, it was mentioned before, to give educators professional development. These are simple, but I think powerful steps to help kids focus and learn. We know that some of the best countries in the world that are achieving at high rates academically don't allow phones in their schools. So this is a step that we can take to help kids focus and learn. And in Excel in Ed, we have a policy primer. If you're interested, we can go in more detail and provide guidance. But thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Tom. I think one thing that really resonated with me that you mentioned is so often we're talking about what the educator can do, what the parent can do, but what can the ed tech company do as well? What can that social media company be required to do as well? So there's a whole ecosystem here that's really important that we're not only addressing the people who are engaging directly in front of the students, but we're also thinking about what are we requiring of our vendors and those folks in tech. We have time maybe for one or two questions. There's a lot of information here. It's a perspective that we really appreciate you sharing with us this afternoon. Anybody have a question for our panelists?
This is a question for Tom, although Lauren answered this too. So Tom and Lauren, I guess, as a state that has not enacted legislation, what would you say would be some preliminary ideas you suggest we take a look at as we contemplate legislation, even if it's necessary?
Yeah, I can jump in just, on a couple of things. One, you can look at your school districts currently that maybe have similar policies to learn from them and better understand how it's playing out in their school districts. In Virginia, they facilitated a statewide conversation on the issue. It feels overwhelmingly in support of doing something, restricting phones either at minimum during instructional day or during the school building at all times. You could also survey your teachers to find out where they stand, and all those things that can give you the runway for policy change. Sometimes we hear school districts don't want to take action because they're fearing backlash from parents, which is understandable. Parents want to be connected to their child, but on the other hand, school is a time to be focused on learning and not distracted about what's going on outside of the school. So, but I think these conversations can help get buy-in. You can hear different perspectives. You can learn from districts that have already taken action. But, we strongly suggest that the state should be the bad guy here. If that's the role they need to play, where they come in and say, this is important, we need to set a policy. And then there are different avenues that your state can take. If you're like, we want to let locals decide, well, create a grant program, let them opt in like Arkansas. You want to go like Louisiana and South Carolina and just, go ahead and ban it during the school day. They're just different approaches. And then a middle approach being, during instructional time, but also building in those exceptions, because there are exceptions where phones may be utilized for instructional practice. So.
Okay. One more question. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank them for their willingness to share. We will follow up with all of the links and materials again in our email and follow up to this event. So if you didn't catch everything, stay tuned. More information and resources will be shared with you all. We're going to take a quick minute to transition to our next panel to make sure everybody's been able to join. Again, thanks Tom, Jisoo, and Lauren for joining us. If you want to give us just a quick minute or two, we're going to transition to that next panel, thinking about how do we move forward as we want to engage our youth and empower them. So, thanks so much.